She mocked me while signing our divorce papers, until the judge read my father's will. The courthouse fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Daniel Plainview sat frozen in the wooden chair, watching his wife of 8 years tear apart everything they'd built together with the stroke of a pen. But this isn't just another divorce story. This is about the moment when a father's love reached beyond the grave to deliver the most shocking twist anyone in that courtroom had ever witnessed. Hey there, amazing viewers. Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal, redemption, and a father's ultimate act of love, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. And how are you doing? I genuinely hope you're having a wonderful day. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one will absolutely blow your mind, and you won't want to miss a single one. The pen scratched against paper like fingernails on a chalkboard, each signature another nail in the coffin of Daniel's marriage. Victoria Corleone, soon to be Victoria Corleone again, she made that crystal clear, didn't even try to hide her smirk as she signed away their life together. Her perfectly manicured fingers, the ones that used to trace gentle patterns on his chest during lazy Sunday mornings, now gripped the pen like a weapon. Finally, she whispered, loud enough for everyone in the small courtroom to hear. Finally, I'm free from this pathetic excuse of a man. Daniel's chest tightened. The words hit him like physical blows, each one designed to humiliate him in front of the judge, the lawyers, and a handful of witnesses who'd gathered for what should have been a private proceeding. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his own pen, the weight of it feeling like 1,000 pounds. But Victoria wasn't done. She never was. You know what the funniest part is? She continued, her voice dripping with venom as she leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with theatrical precision. He actually thought he could provide for me. For us. This man who couldn't even afford to fix our leaking roof, who drove that embarrassing 15-year-old Honda, who shopped at thrift stores like we were college students. The courtroom fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even Judge Harrison, a stern man in his 60s who'd seen every kind of human drama unfold in his courtroom, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Daniel's lawyer, Sarah Chun, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. Victoria, please, Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Not here. Not like this. She laughed, actually laughed, a sound that once brought him joy but now felt like shards of glass in his ears. Oh, now you're embarrassed? Now you care about appearances? Where was this concern when you were dragging me down for 8 years? Daniel's father had been dead for exactly 43 days. 43 days since the man who'd raised him alone, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through college, who'd never once told him he loved him but had shown it in 1,000 quiet ways, had suffered a massive heart attack at his construction site. 43 days since Daniel had stood at his graveside, wondering if he'd ever been enough for the man who'd given him everything. And now, as Victoria continued her public humiliation, Daniel couldn't help but think his father had been right to keep his distance from her. The old man had never said a word against Victoria, but Daniel had seen the way his eyes would narrow slightly whenever she complained about their modest lifestyle, whenever she made cutting remarks about Daniel's lack of ambition. Sign the papers, Daniel, Victoria commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. Let's get this over with. I have a lunch date with someone who actually knows how to treat a woman properly. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Daniel had suspected for months, had seen the late-night texts, the mysterious phone calls, the way she'd started dressing up for girls' nights that seemed to happen more and more frequently. But hearing her confirm it, here, in front of everyone, it was like being gutted with a rusty knife. His hand moved toward the papers, but something made him pause. A memory, sudden and vivid, of his father's weathered hands placing a sealed envelope in his jacket pocket just days before he died. Don't open this unless something happens to me, son, his father had said, his voice unusually serious. And if you do have to open it, make sure you're sitting down. Daniel had forgotten about the envelope in the chaos of funeral arrangements and Victoria's sudden announcement that she wanted a divorce. It was still there, in his jacket pocket, the paper soft from being carried around for weeks. What are you waiting for? Victoria snapped, having second thoughts. Because let me make this crystal clear, there's no going back. I'm done pretending to love someone who will never be anything more than his father's disappointing son. The words hit their mark perfectly. Victoria knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. She'd always been gifted that way, able to find the precise spot where someone was most vulnerable and press until they broke. But as Daniel sat there, pen hovering over the divorce papers, Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," the judge said, his voice carrying an odd note of anticipation, "I have something here that needs to be addressed. It was delivered to my chambers this morning by the law firm of Morrison, Webb & Associates." Daniel's blood turned to ice. Morrison, Webb & Associates had been his father's lawyers for over 30 years. Judge Harrison held up a thick, cream-colored envelope with an official seal. It appears to be the last will and testament of one Robert Plainview, dated just 2 weeks before his passing. According to the accompanying letter, Mr. Plainview specifically requested that this will be read in the presence of his son Daniel, and the judge's eyes moved to Victoria, his son's wife, should any legal proceedings involving the dissolution of their marriage take place within 6 months of his death. The courtroom fell silent, except for the buzzing of those fluorescent lights. Victoria's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Well, this should be interesting," she said with a laugh. "Let me guess. He left Daniel his collection of rusty tools and that falling-apart house? How touching." But Daniel wasn't laughing. His father had been many things: distant, stoic, impossibly hard-working, but he'd never been careless with timing. If he'd arranged for his will to be read specifically during divorce proceedings, there was a reason. Judge Harrison broke the seal with deliberate care, unfolding several pages of legal documents. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second, and Daniel watched as the judge's expression shifted from professional neutrality to something that looked almost like shock. "Well," Judge Harrison said slowly, looking up at Daniel with an expression that was impossible to read, "this is unexpected." Victoria leaned forward in her chair, her confidence wavering for the first time all morning. "What does it say?" The judge's eyes met Daniel's, and for just a moment, Daniel could have sworn he saw something that looked like respect. "Perhaps," Judge Harrison said, "we should postpone the signing of these divorce papers until after we've heard what Mr. Robert Plainview had to say." And in that moment, as Victoria's laughter died in her throat and the courtroom held its collective breath, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. What had his father hidden from him all these years? And why had he waited until this exact moment to reveal it? This is just the beginning of Daniel's incredible journey. What do you think Robert Plainview included in that will? Share your predictions in the comments below. I love reading your theories. And if you're as hooked as I am, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take some turns that will absolutely blow your mind. The silence stretched like a taut wire as Judge Harrison adjusted his reading glasses, the pages of Robert Plainview's will rustling in his hands like autumn leaves. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as memories of his father flooded back. Memories he'd buried under years of feeling inadequate, of never quite measuring up to the man who'd seemed carved from granite and determination. Robert Plainview had been a mystery wrapped in work boots and flannel shirts. A man who spoke in grunts and nods, who showed love through packed lunches and college tuition payments rather than words. Daniel had spent his entire childhood trying to decode the language of his father's affection, searching for warmth in a man who seemed to have forgotten how to express it after Daniel's mother died when he was just 7 years old. "Dad never talked about money," Daniel whispered to his lawyer, Sarah Chun, as they waited for the judge to begin reading. "We live paycheck to paycheck." He drove the same beat-up truck for 20 years. Sarah, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd handled Daniel's case pro bono because she believed in fighting for the underdog, squeezed his shoulder gently. She'd seen the way Victoria had systematically destroyed Daniel's confidence over the years, watched him shrink into himself during their marriage counseling sessions. Sarah had 3 brothers of her own, and something about Daniel's quiet dignity reminded her of her youngest brother, the one who always got overlooked but had the biggest heart. "Sometimes the people who seem to have the least are the ones who've been saving everything for the people they love most," Sarah murmured back. Across the table, Victoria drummed her perfectly manicured nails against the polished wood, each tap a staccato beat of impatience. She'd changed so much from the woman Daniel had fallen in love with 9 years ago. Back then, she'd been Victoria Corleone, a struggling art student with paint-stained fingers and dreams bigger than her bank account. She'd loved Daniel's quiet strength, and had told him that his steadiness made her feel safe in a world that had never offered her much security. But somewhere along the way, safety had turned into suffocation for her. Daniel's contentment with their simple life had become a source of resentment. She'd started comparing their modest apartment to her friends' houses, their weekend trips to the local lake, to the European vacations she saw on social media. The woman who'd once found beauty in thrift store finds and homemade dinners had transformed into someone who measured love in dollar signs and status symbols. "You know what I think?" Victoria said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's tension like a blade. "I think this is all some elaborate joke. Robert Plainview was a construction worker who lived in the same tiny house for 40 years. What could he possibly have to leave behind except debt?" Daniel flinched at her words, but they also sparked something deeper, a protective anger he'd rarely allowed himself to feel. His father might have been emotionally distant, but he'd been a good man. Robert had worked himself to the bone to give Daniel opportunities he'd never had. He'd attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every graduation, sitting in the back row with his calloused hands folded in his lap, never saying much, but always there. "My father was a good man," Daniel said quietly, his voice stronger than it had been all morning. "He might not have had much, but he worked for every penny he earned." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Daniel. Your father barely acknowledged my existence. In 8 years of marriage, he probably said 50 words to me total. And now you want to sit here and pretend he was some kind of saint?" The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. Robert had been polite to Victoria, but never warm. Daniel had always assumed it was just his father's natural reserve, his discomfort with emotional displays. But looking back now, he wondered if his father had seen something in Victoria that Daniel had been too in love to notice. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, commanding attention. "Before I begin reading the will, I should mention that it comes with a letter addressed specifically to Daniel. Mr. Plainview requested that the letter be read first, to provide context for the legal documents that follow." Daniel's breath caught. A letter? His father had never written him so much as a birthday card, preferring to slip $20 bills into his pocket with a gruff, "Happy birthday, son." "The letter is dated 2 weeks before Mr. Plainview's death," Judge Harrison continued, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in his father's careful, blocky handwriting. "It reads as follows." The judge's voice took on a different quality as he began to read, as if he understood the weight of a dead man's words reaching across the void to touch his son one last time. "My dear son Daniel, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and you're probably sitting in some lawyer's office or courtroom wondering why your old man couldn't just say what he meant while he was alive to say it. Truth is, I never was good with words, not like your mother was. She could make a grocery list sound like poetry. Me? I could barely manage to tell you I was proud of you, even though I was proud every single day. I know you think I didn't like Victoria. That's not true, son. I didn't trust her. There's a difference. I watched her look at you like you were a stepping stone to something better, and it broke my heart because you couldn't see it. You loved her the way I loved your mother, completely, without reservation, without protecting yourself. It's a beautiful way to love, Daniel, but it's dangerous when the other person doesn't love you back the same way. I never told you this, but I've been saving money since the day you were born. Every overtime shift, every weekend job, every penny I could scrape together went into accounts you didn't know about. I lived small so you could live big when the time came. I drove that old truck and wore those same work clothes because I was building something for you, for your future, for your children, for the family you deserve to have. I also never told you that I was proud of the man you became. You're kind, Daniel. You're gentle and good, and everything I hoped you'd be. Don't let anyone make you feel small for being those things. The world needs more men like you, not fewer. What I'm about to give you isn't just money, son. It's freedom. Freedom to choose a life that makes you happy. Freedom to find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Freedom to be the father I always wanted to be, but never quite figured out how to be. I love you, Daniel. I should have said it more. I should have said it every day. Your father, Robert Plainview. The courtroom was dead silent. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face, hot and unstoppable. 35 years old, and he was finally hearing the words he'd waited his entire life to hear. His father had loved him, had been proud of him, had seen his worth, even when Daniel couldn't see it himself. Victoria's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence cracking like ice in spring. That's very touching," she said, her voice lacking its usual venom. "But a letter doesn't change our financial situation. It doesn't change the fact that we have nothing." Judge Harrison looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Mrs. Plainview," he said gently, "perhaps you should wait to hear the rest before making any assumptions about what your husband has or doesn't have." Sarah Chun was staring at Daniel with growing amazement. In all her years of practicing law, she'd rarely seen such a profound moment of revelation. She could see Daniel transforming before her eyes, his shoulders straightening, his spine stiffening with newfound resolve. "There's more?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Oh, Daniel," Judge Harrison said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "There's so much more." And as the judge turned to the first page of the actual will, Victoria Corleone felt the first cold finger of dread trace its way down her spine. Because for the first time in years, Daniel Plainview was looking at her not with love or hurt or even anger, but with something far more dangerous: clarity. The man she'd spent the morning humiliating was about to discover just how much his father had truly loved him. And she was about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones who hold all the power. The tension is building, isn't it? What do you think Robert Plainview has been hiding all these years? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to know what you're thinking. And if you're as invested in Daniel's story as I am, smash that subscribe button, because this is just getting started. Judge Harrison's fingers traced the first page of the will with deliberate care, his eyes scanning the legal text with the practiced ease of someone who'd read thousands of such documents. But something in his expression suggested this wasn't like the others. This was different. This was extraordinary. "The last will and testament of Robert James Plainview," he began, his voice carrying the weight of official proceedings. "I, Robert James Plainview, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Victoria shifted impatiently in her chair, her earlier nervousness masked by a return of her trademark arrogance. "Can we skip the legal jargon and get to the part where he leaves Daniel his toolbox and that falling apart house?" But Judge Harrison continued as if she hadn't spoken, his voice growing stronger with each word. "To my beloved son, Daniel Robert Plainview, I leave the following assets, which I have accumulated through 43 years of careful investment and financial planning, guided by the investment firm of Blackstone and Associates." Daniel's head snapped up. Blackstone and Associates? He'd never heard his father mention any investment firm. As far as he knew, his father had banked at the same small credit union for decades, keeping his money in a simple checking account. "First," Judge Harrison continued, "I leave to my son the property located at 1247 Maple Street, valued at approximately $340,000, which has been fully paid off since 1998. Daniel's mouth fell open. That was their family home, the modest two-bedroom house where he'd grown up. He'd always assumed his father was still paying the mortgage. Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. $300,000 for that tiny house? Please, that's barely enough to buy a decent car these days." But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. "Second, I leave to my son the rental properties located at the following addresses." He began reading off a list of street names and numbers, each one accompanied by an estimated value. The duplex on Oak Street, valued at $280,000. The 4-unit apartment building on Pine Avenue, valued at $520,000. The commercial property on Main Street, currently leased to Morrison's Hardware, valued at $450,000. The color drained from Victoria's face as the numbers mounted. Daniel sat frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. His father who'd worn the same work boots for 10 years, who'd clipped coupons and shopped at discount stores, had been a property mogul. That's impossible," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was a construction worker. He lived like he was poor." Sarah Chun was frantically scribbling notes, her legal mind already calculating the implications. She'd handled enough divorce cases to know that this changed everything. Everything. "Third," Judge Harrison continued, his voice now carrying a note of what could only be described as satisfaction, I leave to my son the investment portfolio managed by Blackstone and Associates, consisting of diversified stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, with a current value of approximately $2.3 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's pen clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Daniel felt the world tilt on its axis, reality reshaping itself around this impossible revelation. $2.3 million. His father, his quiet, humble father who'd packed his lunch in brown paper bags and darned his own socks, had been a millionaire. But that's not all, Judge Harrison said, and Daniel wondered if it was possible for a person to die from shock. Fourth, I leave to my son the life insurance policy through Metropolitan Life, with a death benefit of $500,000. And fifth, I leave to my son the contents of Safety Deposit Box 247 at First National Bank, which contains additional assets and documentation. Victoria shot to her feet, so quickly her chair toppled backward. This is insane. This is impossible. You can't just... People don't just hide millions of dollars. There has to be some mistake. But Judge Harrison held up a hand for silence, his expression grave. I'm afraid there's more, Mrs. Plainview. And this next part concerns you directly. Victoria's face went white as paper. What do you mean it concerns me? Your husband's father was very specific about the conditions of this inheritance, Judge Harrison said, his voice taking on an ominous tone. Mr. Robert Plainview included several clauses that must be read in their entirety. Daniel found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What kind of conditions? Judge Harrison turned to a new page, his expression becoming even more serious. The inheritance is structured as follows. All assets, properties, and financial holdings are to be placed in an irrevocable trust, with Daniel Robert Plainview as the primary beneficiary. However, the trust includes specific provisions regarding Daniel's marital status and the protection of these assets. Victoria's hands were shaking now, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. What kind of provisions? According to the will, Judge Harrison read, if Daniel Robert Plainview is married at the time of my death, and if divorce proceedings are initiated within 1 year of my passing, the following conditions apply. First, all assets in the trust are to be held exclusively for Daniel and any children he may have, biological or adopted. Second, no spouse who initiates divorce proceedings or who is found to have been unfaithful during the marriage shall have any claim to these assets under any circumstances. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She stumbled backward, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked like panic. But there's more. Judge Harrison continued relentlessly. Mr. Plainview also included a provision for what he termed protection against manipulation. If any spouse is found to have emotionally or psychologically abused Daniel, or to have deliberately undermined his self-worth or confidence, they are to be excluded entirely from any benefit of these assets. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You can't. He can't do that. I'm his wife. I have rights. Sarah Chun looked up from her notes, her expression a mixture of amazement and professional satisfaction. Actually, Mrs. Plainview, he absolutely can do that. And based on what I've witnessed in this courtroom today, I'd say your behavior has been extensively documented. Daniel was staring at the judge in complete shock. His father hadn't just left him money. He protected him. Even from beyond the grave, Robert Plainview was still looking out for his son, still trying to shield him from people who would hurt him. There's one final provision, Judge Harrison said, his voice softening slightly. Mr. Plainview wrote, I pray that my son finds someone who loves him for the good man he is, not for what he can provide. These assets are meant to give him the freedom to choose love over obligation, happiness over duty. Daniel, you deserve to be cherished, not tolerated. Don't settle for less. Tears were streaming down Daniel's face again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of understanding, of finally feeling truly loved and protected. Victoria was backing toward the door, her face a mask of fury and desperation. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll contest this. I'll fight it. You can't just cut me out like this. But Sarah Chun was already shaking her head. Mrs. Plainview, I'd strongly advise against that course of action. This will is ironclad, and your behavior today has been witnessed by multiple parties. Any attempt to contest, it would likely result in additional legal fees with no chance of success. Daniel stood up slowly, feeling like a different person than the man who'd walked into this courtroom an hour ago. The broken, humiliated husband was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood his own worth. "Victoria," he said quietly, his voice steady for the first time all day. "You wanted a divorce. You wanted to be free of me. Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for." She stared at him, seeing perhaps for the first time the man she'd married, the man she'd spent years trying to diminish and control. "Daniel, wait. Maybe we can work this out. Maybe we can try again." "No," Daniel said, and the word carried the weight of finality. "We can't. And you know what? I don't want to." As Victoria fled the courtroom, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor, Daniel sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. His father's love, hidden for so many years behind gruff silences and emotional distance, had finally revealed itself in the most spectacular way possible. But this was just the beginning. Because as Judge Harrison gathered the papers and Sarah Chan began explaining the next steps, Daniel realized that his life, his real life, was just starting. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could almost hear his father's voice, gruff but warm. "Now go find someone who deserves you, son." Can you believe what just happened? Robert Plainview was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. What do you think happens next? Will Victoria try to fight this? And more importantly, what's in that safety deposit box? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. 3 weeks after the courthouse revelation, Daniel stood in the marble lobby of Blackstone and Associates, feeling like an imposter in his father's expensive suit. The building stretched 40 stories into the Seattle sky, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated wealth that whispered rather than shouted. He'd never imagined his father had even known places like this existed, let alone conducted business here for over 2 decades. "Mr. Plainview," a woman's voice, warm and professional, cut through his nervous contemplation. "I'm Emma Stone, Senior Portfolio Manager. I've been handling your father's accounts since 2018. Daniel turned and felt his breath catch. Emma Stone was nothing like what he'd expected from a high-power financial advisor. She was probably in her early 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent green eyes that seemed to see right through his nervous facade. She wore a simple navy blazer and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from being genuinely good at what she did. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her smile genuine. "Your father spoke about you often. He was incredibly proud of you." "He talked about me?" Daniel asked, still struggling to reconcile this new version of his father with the man he'd thought he knew. Emma's expression softened. "All the time. He used to say you had your mother's heart, that you saw the good in everyone, sometimes to your own detriment. He was worried about that, you know, worried that people would take advantage of your kindness." They walked through the office, past floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Elliott Bay. Daniel felt like he was walking through someone else's life, someone who belonged in places like this. "I have to ask," Daniel said as they settled into Emma's office, "how did my father afford all this? I mean, I know he worked hard, but construction workers don't usually have multi-million-dollar portfolios." Emma smiled, pulling out a thick file folder. "Your father was one of the most disciplined investors I've ever worked with. He started small, very small. Back in 1982, he began putting away $50 a month. Every raise, every bonus, every overtime check, he increased his contributions. He lived on exactly what he needed and invested everything else." She opened the folder, revealing decades of investment statements, all meticulously organized. But the real key was time and patience. Your father never panicked during market downturns, never got greedy during bull markets. He just kept investing, month after month, year after year. Compound interest is a powerful thing when you give it 40 years to work. Daniel stared at the papers, seeing his father's careful signature on document after document. "Why didn't he tell me? Why live like we were struggling when he had all this?" "Because he was building it for you," Emma said simply. "Every decision he made was about giving you options he never had. He wanted you to choose your own path, not feel obligated to follow his." As Emma walked him through the portfolio, the blue-chip stocks, the real estate investments, the carefully balanced mutual funds, Daniel's phone buzzed with yet another text from Victoria. She'd been calling and texting nonstop since the courthouse, alternating between threats, pleas, and attempts at seduction. "Daniel, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Don't throw away 8 years over one bad day." Emma noticed his expression. "Everything all right?" Daniel hesitated, then found himself telling her about Victoria, about the divorce, about the humiliation in the courthouse. There was something about Emma's calm presence that made him want to be honest, to stop pretending everything was fine. "She's been trying to contact me constantly," he admitted. "Part of me wonders if I should give her another chance. 8 years is a long time to just throw it away." Emma was quiet for a moment, studying his face. "Can I tell you something your father told me about 6 months ago?" Daniel nodded. "He said he was worried about your marriage. He said Victoria made you smaller, made you doubt yourself. He told me, 'Emma, my boy deserves someone who makes him feel like he can conquer the world, not someone who makes him feel grateful just to be tolerated.'" The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, partly because they were so accurate, and partly because they came from his father, the man who'd seemed to notice everything but say nothing. "He saw it too," Daniel whispered. "He saw it, and he did something about it," Emma said gently. "That wasn't just about money, Daniel. It was about giving you the strength to choose better for yourself." Over the next hour, Emma walked him through the practical aspects of his inheritance. The rental properties were all managed by a reputable company and generated substantial monthly income. The investment portfolio was diversified and stable. The life insurance money was already being processed. "There's also the matter of the safety deposit box," Emma said, pulling out a small key. "Your father left specific instructions that you should open it when you felt ready to fully embrace your new life." Daniel took the key, feeling its weight. "What's in it?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "He was very secretive about that. But knowing your father, it's something important." As they wrapped up the meeting, Emma walked him to the elevator. "Daniel, can I give you some advice? Not as your financial advisor, but as someone who watched your father worry about you for years." He nodded. "Don't let guilt or obligation make your decisions for you. Your father spent 40 years building this legacy, so you could have choices. Don't waste that gift by choosing the familiar over the right." The elevator doors opened, but Daniel hesitated. "Emma, would you maybe like to have dinner sometime? I mean, to talk about investments and things." She smiled, and for the first time since his father's death, Daniel felt something that might have been hope. "I'd like that. But Daniel, when we have dinner, let's not talk about investments at all. Let's talk about what you want to do with your life now that you're free to choose." As the elevator descended, Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another text from Victoria, this one more desperate than the last. "I know about the money now. Everyone's talking about it. Daniel, I was wrong. I was stupid. Please don't let money come between us. I love you. I've always loved you." But for the first time in 8 years, Daniel deleted the message without responding. Because Emma was right. He had choices now. And for the first time in his adult life, he was going to choose what made him happy instead of what felt safe or familiar or expected. That evening, Daniel sat in his father's house, his house now, surrounded by boxes of memories and legal documents. The modest 2-bedroom home felt different now that he knew it was fully paid off, now that he understood it represented not poverty, but careful planning and sacrifice. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Victoria's number. His finger hovered over the call button for a long moment. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of shared memories, and inside jokes and quiet moments. Surely that counted for something? But then he remembered her laughter in the courthouse, the way she'd mocked him in front of strangers, the years of subtle put-downs and casual cruelty that had slowly eroded his self-worth. He remembered his father's words, "Don't settle for less." Instead of calling Victoria, he typed out a simple text. "The divorce papers are signed. Please don't contact me again. I wish you well, but we're done." Then he blocked her number. For the first time in months, Daniel Plainview slept peacefully, dreaming not of the past, but of possibilities he was only beginning to imagine. But Victoria Corleone wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. And, as Daniel was discovering his new life, she was plotting to take it away from him, one way or another. The war for Daniel's future was just beginning. Things are heating up. Daniel's finally standing up for himself. But something tells me Victoria isn't going to give up that easily. And what about Emma? I'm getting some serious romantic vibes there. What do you think is in that safety deposit box? Drop your theories in the comments. I love seeing your predictions. 2 months had passed since the courthouse confrontation, and Daniel's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The rental properties were generating more monthly income than he'd made in an entire year at his old job. The investment portfolio continued to grow under Emma's careful management. Most importantly, he was beginning to remember who he'd been before Victoria had slowly chipped away at his confidence. He'd taken Emma to dinner 3 times now, and each evening it felt like discovering a new part of himself. She laughed at his jokes, listened to his dreams of maybe starting his own business, and never once made him feel like he needed to apologize for taking up space in the world. Tonight, they were meeting at Canlis, an upscale restaurant overlooking Lake Union, the kind of place Victoria had always complained they could never afford. Daniel arrived early, nervous energy making him fidget with his tie. He'd bought new clothes, gotten a proper haircut, and was slowly learning to carry himself like a man who belonged in nice places. The maitre d' led him to a table by the window, where the city lights reflected off the dark water like scattered diamonds. "You look happy," Emma said as she approached the table, and Daniel felt his heart skip. She wore a simple black dress that somehow made her green eyes even more striking, and when she smiled, he felt like the luckiest man in Seattle. "I feel happy," he admitted as he stood to pull out her chair. "For the first time in years, I actually feel happy." They ordered wine and settled into the easy conversation that had become natural between them. Emma told him about her day, about a difficult client who wanted to invest his entire portfolio in cryptocurrency, and Daniel found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. "So, I have news," Emma said as their appetizers arrived. "I've been doing some research into your father's other investments, and I found something interesting." Daniel leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of something?" "Well, you know how your father was always very secretive about certain aspects of his portfolio? I think I know why." Emma pulled out a folder from her purse. "It turns out your father didn't just invest in stocks and real estate. He also invested in people." "What do you mean?" Emma opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. "Over the past 15 years, your father quietly funded college educations for 12 different students. Kids from low-income families who couldn't afford tuition. He paid for everything: tuition, books, room and board. But he did it anonymously through a scholarship foundation he created." Daniel stared at the papers, his throat tight with emotion. He never said anything. "There's more," Emma continued gently. "He also funded a program that provides tools and equipment to young people who want to learn construction trades but can't afford the startup costs. And he's been anonymously paying the medical bills for 3 families in your old neighborhood who were facing bankruptcy due to healthcare costs." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. His father, the man he'd thought was emotionally distant and focused only on work, had been quietly changing lives for years. "How much?" Daniel whispered. "Over the past 15 years, about $800,000. All done quietly. All done without any recognition or tax benefits. He just helped people." Daniel felt tears threatening and didn't try to stop them. "I thought he didn't care about anything except work and saving money. I thought he was just cold." Emma reached across the table and took his hand. "Daniel, your father wasn't cold. He was just a man who showed love through actions instead of words. And now you get to decide how to continue his legacy." As they talked about the scholarship foundation and the various programs his father had funded, Daniel felt a profound shift in his understanding of the man who'd raised him. Robert Plainview hadn't been emotionally unavailable. He'd been quietly heroic, changing lives while asking for nothing in return. "I want to continue it," Daniel said suddenly. "All of it. The scholarships, the trade program, everything. Can we do that?" Emma's smile was radiant. "We can do whatever you want, Daniel. It's your money now, your choice how to use it." They were deep in conversation about expanding the scholarship program when Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and froze. The text was from an unknown number, but he recognized the writing style immediately. "Having dinner at Canlis? How nice. Enjoy spending my money, Daniel. But you should know, I'm not giving up. I have lawyers now. Good ones. See you soon. V." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "She's watching me," he whispered, showing Emma the text. Emma's expression hardened. "How did she get this number?" "You blocked her. She must have gotten a new phone." Daniel looked around the restaurant, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. "How does she know where we are?" "Daniel, this is stalking. You need to call the police." But before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer's name, Sarah Chun. At 8:30 on a Friday night, this couldn't be good news. "Sarah? What's wrong?" "Daniel, I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a problem. Victoria has filed a motion to contest the will. She's claiming that your father was mentally incompetent when he wrote it, and that you somehow manipulated him into excluding her." Daniel felt the world tilt. "Can she do that?" "She can try. Her lawyers are arguing that the will is invalid because it was written too close to your father's death, and they're claiming that the provisions excluding her are evidence of undue influence. They're also alleging that you hid the existence of the assets from her during the marriage, which they say constitutes fraud." Emma was watching Daniel's face, her expression growing more concerned by the second. "But that's insane," Daniel said. "I didn't even know about the money until the will was read. How could I have hidden something I didn't know existed?" "I know that, and you know that, but they're going to try to prove otherwise." "Daniel, there's something else. They've hired a private investigator. They've been following you, documenting your spending, trying to build a case that you're squandering marital assets." The pieces clicked into place. The text about Canlis, the feeling of being watched. Victoria had been having him followed. "What do I do?" Daniel asked. "First, document everything. Every text, every call, every time you see her or feel like you're being watched. Second, we're going to need to prove that your father was of sound mind when he wrote the will, and that you had no knowledge of the assets beforehand. And third," Sarah paused. "Daniel, they're going to try to destroy your character. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life, looking for anything they can use against you. Are you prepared for that?" Daniel looked across the table at Emma, who was listening to every word with a growing alarm. "I don't have a choice, do I?" "No," Sarah said quietly. "You don't. But Daniel, we're going to fight this. Your father's will is solid, and Victoria's behavior in the courthouse is well documented. We can win this, but it's going to get ugly." After Daniel hung up, he and Emma sat in silence for a long moment. The romantic evening had been shattered, replaced by the cold reality of legal warfare. "I'm sorry," Daniel said finally. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess." Emma squeezed his hand tighter. "Daniel, look at me. I'm not going anywhere. Your father spent 40 years building something beautiful for you, and I'm not going to let Victoria destroy it. We're going to fight this together. But you barely know me. Why would you want to get involved in something like this?" Emma was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Because in the 2 months I've known you, I've watched you discover who you really are. I've seen you grow from a man who apologized for existing into someone who's ready to continue his father's legacy of helping others. That's not something I'm willing to walk away from." As they left the restaurant, Daniel felt the weight of the battle ahead. Victoria wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting to destroy the new life he was building, to drag him back into the small, diminished version of himself that she preferred. But for the first time since this all began, Daniel wasn't facing the fight alone. He had Emma, he had Sarah, and most importantly, he had his father's love and protection reaching out from beyond the grave. The war was just beginning, but Daniel Plainview was no longer the broken man who'd sat in that courthouse 2 months ago. He was his father's son, and he was ready to fight for the life he deserved. Victoria wanted a battle. She was about to get one. The plot thickens. Victoria is playing dirty now, but Daniel has allies. And did you catch that romantic tension between Daniel and Emma? Things are about to get intense. What do you think Victoria's next move will be? Let me know in the comments below. The courtroom felt different this time. Where 2 months ago Daniel had sat broken and humiliated, now he faced a full-scale legal assault that threatened to destroy everything his father had built. Victoria sat across the aisle with her new legal team. 3 sharp-suited attorneys from one of Seattle's most prestigious firms, the kind of lawyers who specialize in taking apart carefully constructed lives. She looked different too. Gone was the vindictive woman who'd mocked him during their divorce. In her place sat a picture of wounded innocence, a grieving widow who'd been cruelly deceived by her manipulative husband. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup subtle, her clothing conservative and sympathetic. She'd even managed to summon tears that glistened prettily in the courtroom's fluorescent lighting. "Your Honor," Victoria's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Gere, addressed the judge with practiced gravitas. "My client has been the victim of an elaborate deception that spans nearly a decade. While she struggled to make ends meet, believing her husband was barely scraping by, he was secretly hoarding millions of dollars and plotting to leave her destitute." Daniel felt sick. Sarah Chun squeezed his shoulder reassuringly, but even she looked worried. The past 3 weeks have been a nightmare of depositions, document requests, and character assassinations. Victoria's team had been thorough and ruthless. Furthermore, Gere continued, "we have evidence that Mr. Plainview manipulated his elderly father, taking advantage of the man's grief over his recent cancer diagnosis to influence the writing of this will." Daniel's head snapped up. Cancer diagnosis? What cancer diagnosis? Sarah was already on her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. There's been no evidence presented of any cancer diagnosis." Judge Harrison, a different judge this time, since the original proceedings have been transferred to probate court, looked stern. "Mr. Gere, do you have documentation to support this claim?" Gere smiled coldly and produced a manila folder. "We do, Your Honor. Medical records from Swedish Medical Center showing that Robert Plainview was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer 6 weeks before his death. Records that his son somehow failed to mention during the original proceedings." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. His father had been dying of cancer and hadn't told him. The man who'd worked construction until the day he died, who'd seemed invincible despite his age, had been fighting a terminal illness alone? "That's impossible," Daniel whispered. But even as he said it, pieces began falling into place. His father's recent weight loss, which Daniel had attributed to working too hard. The way he'd seemed more tired lately, more reflective. The sudden urgency about getting his affairs in order. The medical records show that Mr. Robert Plainview was given a prognosis of 3 to 6 months. Gere continued relentlessly. He was facing his own mortality, grieving, and vulnerable to manipulation. And who was there to take advantage of that vulnerability? His son, who had recently learned about his father's hidden wealth and saw an opportunity to cut out the woman who had been part of the family for 8 years. "That's a lie." Daniel stood up, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "I didn't know about any money. I didn't even know he was sick." "Mr. Plainview," Judge Harrison said sternly, "please remain seated and allow your attorney to speak for you." But the damage was done. Daniel could see the doubt in the judge's eyes, could feel the shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. Victoria's team had painted a picture of a greedy son manipulating his dying father, and without proof to the contrary, it was a compelling narrative. Sarah stood up, her voice steady despite the bombshell that had just been dropped. "Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of his father's illness. If Mr. Plainview chose not to share his diagnosis with his son, that was his decision, not evidence of manipulation." "But that's just it," Gere interrupted smoothly. "We have evidence that Daniel Plainview didn't know about his father's condition. Phone records show multiple calls between father and son in the weeks leading up to the will's creation. Bank records show that Daniel visited his father's bank and spoke with representatives about account information. And most damning of all," Gere paused for dramatic effect, and Daniel felt his world beginning to crumble. "We have testimony from a witness who overheard Daniel Plainview telling his father that his marriage was in trouble and that he was worried about losing everything in a divorce. This conversation took place just days before the will was written." Daniel's mind raced. He had visited the bank, but only to help his father with a simple account transfer. He had mentioned his marital problems, but only because his father had asked why he seemed so unhappy. Every innocent interaction was being twisted into evidence of a conspiracy. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "this is all circumstantial evidence being presented in the worst possible light. The fact that his son helped his father with banking and confided in him about personal problems is not evidence of manipulation." But Judge Harrison looked troubled. "Ms. Chun, these are serious allegations. The timing is certainly suspicious. A man changes his will to exclude his daughter-in-law just weeks before his death, after learning he has terminal cancer and after his son confides that his marriage is failing." Emma, who had been sitting in the gallery, looked pale and shaken. Daniel caught her eye and saw something there that made his heart sink doubt. Not about his character, but about whether they could win this fight. Victoria's second attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Jennifer Lawrence, stood up with another folder. Your Honor, we also have evidence that Mr. Daniel Plainview has been deliberately squandering marital assets since learning of his inheritance. Expensive dinners, new clothes, luxury purchases, all while his estranged wife struggles to pay rent on a modest apartment. Daniel felt the walls closing in. Every dinner with Emma, every new shirt he'd bought, every small luxury he'd allowed himself after years of deprivation, it was all being used against him. Furthermore, Lawrence continued, we have evidence that Mr. Plainview has entered into a romantic relationship with his financial advisor, creating a clear conflict of interest and raising questions about whether his assets are being properly managed or whether they're being used to fund his new lifestyle. Emma stood up abruptly and walked out of the courtroom, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Daniel wanted to follow her, but Sarah's firm hand on his arm kept him in his seat. Your Honor, Sarah said, my client is a single man who is free to date whomever he chooses. The fact that he's found companionship after the end of his marriage is not evidence of wrongdoing. But Judge Harrison was shaking his head. Ms. Chun, the optics here are very troubling. A man inherits millions of dollars, immediately begins a relationship with the woman managing those assets, and starts spending lavishly while his wife of 8 years is left with nothing. I'm beginning to think Mrs. Plainview may have a valid claim. Daniel felt his world collapsing. Everything his father had worked for, everything he'd built to protect his son, was being systematically destroyed by Victoria's lies and half-truths. Your Honor, Gear said, moving in for the kill, we request that all assets be frozen pending a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding the creation of this will. We also request that Mr. Plainview be required to account for every penny he spent since the inheritance was revealed. Motion granted, Judge Harrison said, and Daniel felt his heart stop. All assets are frozen effective immediately. Mr. Plainview, you are not to access any funds, sell any properties, or make any major financial decisions until this matter is resolved. As the gavel fell, Daniel sat in stunned silence. In the span of an hour, he'd gone from being a millionaire to being effectively broke. Worse, he'd lost Emma, who had fled rather than be dragged through the mud of this legal battle. Victoria turned to look at him as she gathered her papers, and, for just a moment, her mask slipped. The triumphant smile she gave him was pure malice, the look of someone who had just destroyed her enemy and was savoring every moment of it. See you at the next hearing, Daniel, she said sweetly as she passed his table. I hope you enjoyed playing rich man while it lasted. As the courtroom emptied, Daniel sat alone with Sarah, feeling more defeated than he had even during their original divorce proceedings. Can we fight this? He asked quietly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Daniel, I'm going to be honest with you. They've built a compelling case. The timing, the circumstances, the medical records we didn't know about. It all looks very suspicious to an outside observer. But you believe me, right? You know I didn't manipulate my father. I believe you, Sarah said firmly. But belief isn't enough in a courtroom. We need proof. We need evidence that your father acted independently, that he wasn't influenced by anyone. Daniel thought about the safety deposit box key that still sat in his dresser drawer at home. He'd been too overwhelmed by everything else to open it, but now he wondered if his father had left him something that could help. There might be something, he said slowly. My father left me a safety deposit box. I haven't opened it yet. Sarah's eyes lit up with the first hope he'd seen all day. Daniel, we need to open that box. Tonight. If your father left any documentation about his decision-making process, any evidence that he acted independently, it could save everything. As they left the courthouse, Daniel felt the weight of his father's legacy hanging in the balance. Victoria had played her hand brilliantly, turning his father's love and protection into evidence of manipulation and greed. But Robert Plainview had been a careful man, a man who planned for every contingency. If there was a way to save what he'd built for his son, Daniel had to believe his father had thought of it. The safety deposit box held the key to everything. It had to, because if it didn't, Daniel would lose not just his inheritance, but his father's legacy of helping others, his relationship with Emma, and any chance of the life his father had died trying to give him. The darkest hour had arrived, and Daniel Plainview was about to discover whether his father's love was strong enough to reach across death itself and save him one more time. This is devastating. Victoria is playing chess while Daniel is playing checkers, and she's winning. But something tells me Robert Plainview was smarter than anyone realizes. What do you think is in that safety deposit box? Could it be the key to saving everything? Drop your theories below. I need to know what you're thinking. The First National Bank felt like a mausoleum at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. All marble floors and hushed voices that seemed to echo with the weight of other people's secrets. Daniel's hand shook as he held the small brass key, the last gift from a father who had somehow anticipated this exact moment of crisis. Sarah Chun walked beside him, her briefcase clutched tightly as they approached the safety deposit box vault. The weekend had been a blur of emergency legal research and desperate phone calls. The asset freeze meant Daniel couldn't even access his regular checking account. He was living on the $43 in his wallet and the kindness of his lawyer, who had insisted on paying for his hotel room. "Whatever's in there," Sarah said quietly as they waited for the bank manager. "We need to be prepared for the possibility that it won't be enough. Victoria's team has built a strong case." Daniel nodded, but something deep in his chest told him his father wouldn't have left him defenseless. Robert Plainview had been many things, but careless wasn't one of them. The bank manager, a thin man with kind eyes named Mr. Peterson, led them into the vault. "Box 247, he said, inserting his master key alongside Daniel's. "Your father was very specific about the instructions for this box. He said it should only be opened if you were facing what he called a crisis of truth." The metal drawer slid out with a soft whisper, revealing the contents that made Daniel's breath catch. Inside wasn't just paperwork. There was a small digital camera, several manila envelopes marked with dates, and a thick leather journal bound with a rubber band. "He documented everything," Daniel whispered, lifting out the journal with reverent hands. Sarah was already examining the envelopes. "Daniel, look at these dates. They go back months before his death. Whatever your father was planning, he started long before he got sick." Daniel opened the journal to the first page and immediately recognized his father's careful handwriting. If Daniel is reading this, then Victoria has shown her true colors, and my son needs to know the truth about the woman he married. I pray I'm wrong about her, but a father's instincts are rarely mistaken when it comes to protecting his child. The entries that followed painted a picture of a man who had been quietly investigating his daughter-in-law for over a year. Robert Plainview had documented Victoria's spending habits, her secret credit cards, her mysterious absences. But more damning were the photographs. Sarah gasped as Daniel pulled out a stack of pictures from one of the envelopes. They showed Victoria entering and leaving a downtown apartment building, always with the same man, tall, well-dressed, clearly not her husband. "The timestamps," Sarah said, examining the photos with a lawyer's eye for detail. "These go back 18 months, Daniel. She's been having an affair for over a year." But the real bombshell was in the digital camera. Daniel's hands trembled as he turned it on, scrolling through video files that his father had somehow managed to record. The first video showed Victoria in a coffee shop, talking animatedly on her phone. The audio was clear enough to make out her words. "No, Marcus, he has no idea about the money. His father keeps everything secret from him. Daniel's too stupid to figure it out on his own. Yes, I'm sure. The old man has been playing poor for years, but I've seen the bank statements when he wasn't looking. There's millions, Marcus, millions." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew about the money before I did." Sarah was frantically taking notes. "This changes everything. If she knew about the assets and didn't disclose them during the divorce proceedings, she committed fraud." The second video was even more damaging. It showed Victoria meeting with a man Daniel didn't recognize, an older, expensive suit, the kind of person who radiated wealth and power. "The plan is simple." Victoria's voice came through clearly. "I file for divorce, take half of everything, and then we're set. Daniel will never fight me. He's too weak. And even if he tries, who's going to believe that his construction worker father was secretly rich? And if the old man dies before the divorce is final?" the man asked. "Even better. Daniel inherits everything, and I get half as his wife. Either way, we win." Daniel sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the betrayal. She planned it all. The divorce, the timing, everything. She was just waiting for my father to die. But Sarah was smiling for the first time in days. Daniel, this is it. This is what we need. Your father didn't just document her affair. He documented her premeditation. She knew about the assets. She planned to defraud you. And she's been lying under oath. The final envelope contained something that made Daniel's heart stop. A letter from his father's doctor, dated 3 months before Robert's death. Mr. Plainview, as we discussed, your recent tests show no signs of cancer or any other serious illness. You are in excellent health for a man your age. I'm not sure why you requested such extensive testing, but I'm happy to report that you have many healthy years ahead of you. The cancer diagnosis, Daniel breathed. It was a lie. Victoria's team fabricated medical records. Sarah was already on her phone. This is criminal fraud, Daniel. Not just civil fraud, criminal. They forged medical documents and presented them as evidence in court. As they gathered the evidence, Daniel found one final item in the safety deposit box, a sealed letter addressed to him in his father's handwriting. With shaking hands, he opened it. Asterisk, my dear son. If you're reading this, then Victoria has revealed herself to be exactly what I feared she was. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way, but I needed you to see her clearly before you could move forward with your life. I've been watching her for months, documenting her lies and her plans. I know about Marcus Aurelius, the man she's been seeing. I know about their scheme to take your inheritance. I know about the fake medical records they plan to use if necessary. But most importantly, I know that you are strong enough to survive this. You are my son, and you have more courage than you realize. Don't let her destroy the good man you are. The evidence in this box will protect you, but more than that, it will free you. Free you to find someone who loves you for who you are, not what you can provide. Free you to continue the work I started, helping people who need it most. I love you, Daniel. I should have said it more often, but I love you with every fiber of my being. Now go fight for the life you deserve. Your father, Robert, asterisk. Daniel wiped tears from his eyes as Sarah finished her phone calls. I've contacted the district attorney's office, she said. They're very interested in the forged medical records, and I've scheduled an emergency hearing for this afternoon. As they left the bank, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. His father had protected him one final time, reaching across death to expose the truth about the woman who had tried to destroy him. But there was something else he needed to do, someone he needed to see. Emma was in her office at Blackstone & Associates, staring out at the Seattle skyline with red-rimmed eyes. She looked up when Daniel knocked, and he saw the pain in her expression. Daniel, I can't. This is too complicated. The conflict of interest, the legal battle. I can't be part of this. Emma, wait, Daniel said, stepping into her office. I need to show you something. He pulled out his phone and played one of the videos from his father's camera. As Victoria's voice filled the room, admitting to her knowledge of the money and her plans to defraud Daniel, Emma's expression changed from resignation to shock to anger. She knew, Emma whispered. She knew all along. My father documented everything. The affair, the fraud, the fake medical records, all of it. Emma, I'm going to win this fight. But more than that, I'm going to be free. Really free for the first time in my adult life. Emma stood up slowly, hope dawning in her green eyes. The medical records were fake, completely fabricated. My father was in perfect health when he died. The heart attack was sudden and unexpected, just like we thought. Emma walked around her desk and took his hands. Daniel, I'm so sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I ran. You don't have anything to apologize for, Daniel said, pulling her close. You were protecting yourself, and I understand that. But Emma, I need you to know, whatever happens with the money, whatever the court decides, I want you in my life. Not as my financial advisor, not because of what I can provide, but because you make me feel like the man I want to be. Emma's smile was radiant as she reached up to touch his face. Your father would be so proud of you right now. He already saved me once, Daniel said, thinking of the evidence that would soon destroy Victoria's case. Now it's my turn to save myself. As they held each other in the afternoon, light streaming through the office windows, Daniel felt the tide turning. Victoria had played her hand brilliantly, but she'd underestimated Robert Plainview's love for his son. The war wasn't over yet, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel knew he was going to win. And when he did, He was going to build the life his father had died trying to give him, a life filled with love, purpose, and the freedom to choose happiness over obligation. The turning point had arrived, and Daniel Plainview was ready to fight for everything that mattered. Yes, Robert Plainview was playing 4D chess this whole time. He knew exactly what Victoria was planning, and he documented everything. But the real question is, how will Victoria react when her lies are exposed? This is about to get explosive. What do you think happens next? Let me know in the comments. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m., but by 1:30, the courthouse was buzzing with an energy that felt electric. Word had somehow leaked that explosive new evidence was about to be presented in the Plainview inheritance case, and the gallery was packed with reporters, legal observers, and curious onlookers who sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah Chun, the evidence from his father's safety deposit box organized in neat stacks before them. Across the aisle, Victoria huddled with her legal team, but something had changed in her demeanor. Gone was the confident woman who had dominated the previous hearing. In her place sat someone who looked nervous, almost frantic, constantly whispering urgent instructions to her lawyers. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom with a stern expression that suggested he was not pleased about being called back for an emergency session. Ms. Chun, you've requested this hearing claiming to have new evidence that fundamentally changes this case. I hope for your sake that's true. Sarah stood, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, the evidence we're about to present will show that this entire case is built on fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. Mrs. Plainview has not only lied under oath, but she and her associates have fabricated evidence and committed multiple felonies in their attempt to steal my client's rightful inheritance. Richard Gere shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is inflammatory rhetoric designed to... Mr. Gere, Judge Harrison interrupted. You'll have your chance to respond. Ms. Chun, proceed. Sarah walked to the evidence table and picked up the digital camera. Your Honor, I'd like to present video evidence recorded by the late Robert Plainview, showing Mrs. Plainview admitting prior knowledge of the inheritance she now claims was hidden from her. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah connected the camera to the court's audiovisual system. Victoria's face went white as her own voice filled the room. No, Marcus, he has no idea about the money. His father keeps everything secret from him. Daniel's too stupid to figure it out on his own. Yes, I'm sure. The old man has been playing poor for years, but I've seen the bank statements when he wasn't looking. There's millions, Marcus, millions. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Reporters frantically scribbled notes, and Victoria's lawyers began whispering urgently among themselves. Victoria herself looked like she might be sick. Your Honor, Sarah continued, this recording is time-stamped 18 months before Mr. Robert Plainview's death. It clearly shows that Mrs. Plainview had knowledge of the assets she now claims were hidden from her. But Sarah wasn't finished. She played the second video, where Victoria outlined her plan to divorce Daniel and take half of everything, admitting that she was only waiting for the right moment to strike. Judge Harrison's expression grew darker with each revelation. Mrs. Plainview, do you have an explanation for these recordings? Victoria started to stand, but her lawyer pulled her back down. Your Honor, Gere said, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. We need time to review this evidence, and... No, Judge Harrison said firmly. Mrs. Plainview will answer the question. Do you deny that this is your voice on these recordings? Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she whispered, I can explain. Please do, the judge said coldly. But before Victoria could speak, Sarah played her trump card. Your Honor, there's more. We also have evidence that the medical records presented by Mrs. Plainview's team, claiming that Robert Plainview had cancer, are completely fabricated. Sarah handed the judge the letter from Robert's doctor, the one confirming his perfect health just months before his death. As Judge Harrison read it, his face grew thunderous. Mr. Gere, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, are you telling me that your team presented forged medical documents as evidence in my courtroom? Gere was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly trying to find some way to salvage the situation. Your Honor, we received those documents from a reliable source. If there's been some mistake, Judge Harrison's voice rose. Mr. Gear, presenting fabricated evidence is not a mistake. It's a felony. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Victoria was crying, and her legal team was in full damage control mode. But through it all, Daniel sat quietly, watching the woman who had tormented him for years finally face the consequences of her actions. Sarah wasn't done. She presented the photographs of Victoria's affair, the documented evidence of her secret spending, and finally, Robert Plainview's journal, which detailed months of careful investigation into his daughter-in-law's deception. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise. Robert Plainview wasn't a confused old man manipulated by his son. He was a careful, intelligent man who saw through Mrs. Plainview's lies and took steps to protect his son from a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a meal ticket. Judge Harrison called for order, his gavel echoing like gunshots through the courtroom. When silence finally fell, he looked directly at Victoria with undisguised disgust. Mrs. Plainview, in 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated attempt to defraud the court system. You have lied under oath, presented fabricated evidence, and attempted to steal millions of dollars from your ex-husband through criminal conspiracy. Victoria was sobbing now, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. Your Honor, please, I can explain everything. I was desperate. I was scared. You were greedy, Judge Harrison interrupted, and you were willing to destroy a good man to satisfy that greed. The judge turned to Daniel, his expression softening slightly. Mr. Plainview, I owe you an apology. This court was deceived by sophisticated fraud, and you have suffered as a result. The asset freeze is hereby lifted immediately, and all claims against your father's estate are dismissed with prejudice. But Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mrs. Plainview, you are facing charges of perjury, fraud, conspiracy, and forgery. Mr. Gear, your law firm will be reported to the State Bar for presenting fabricated evidence. As the gavel fell, the courtroom exploded again. Victoria's remaining lawyer was trying to hustle her toward the exit, but she broke free and turned to face Daniel one last time. You think you've won? She screamed, her mask of innocence completely gone. You think this makes you better than me? You're still the same pathetic loser I married. Money doesn't change who you are. Daniel stood slowly, and for the first time since he'd known her, he looked at Victoria with complete clarity. You're right, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Money doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. He paused, looking at the woman who had spent 8 years trying to make him feel small and worthless. I'm grateful for that revelation, Victoria, because now I know exactly who I'm not. As Victoria was led away, still screaming threats and accusations, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The nightmare was over. His father's love had protected him one final time, and the truth had finally set him free. Emma appeared at his side, having watched the entire proceeding from the gallery. How do you feel? She asked softly. Daniel considered the question. How do you feel? Vindicated, certainly. Relieved, absolutely. But more than that, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom. I feel like my father's son, he said finally. And for the first time in my life, that feels like enough. Sarah was gathering her papers, a satisfied smile on her face. Daniel, there's one more thing. The district attorney wants to discuss a plea agreement with Victoria. If she cooperates and returns any asset she may have hidden, they might reduce the charges. Daniel shook his head. That's up to them. I'm done with Victoria Corleone. I have more important things to focus on now. As they left the courthouse, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, his heart clenched, thinking it might be Victoria again. But when he read it, he smiled. It was from one of the scholarship recipients his father had been supporting, a young woman named Maria who had just graduated from nursing school. Mr. Plainview, I just heard about your father's passing. I wanted you to know that his scholarship changed my life. I'm now working at Seattle Children's Hospital, helping kids who remind me of myself. Your father was a hero to people he never even met. I hope you know how proud he would be of you. Daniel showed the text to Emma, who smiled through tears. Your father's legacy isn't just the money, Daniel. It's the lives he changed, the people he helped, the love he showed in ways that mattered. And now it's my turn to continue that legacy, Daniel said, pulling Emma close as they walked into the Seattle sunshine. Our turn, if you'll have me. Emma's answer was a kiss that tasted like freedom, like new beginnings, like the life Robert Plainview had died trying to give his son. The war was over, and love had won. Justice served. Victoria's lies finally caught up with her, and Daniel is free. But this isn't just about winning in court. It's about Daniel finally understanding his own worth. One more part to go, and I promise it's going to be beautiful. What do you think Daniel does with his freedom now? Share your thoughts below. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly renovated community center on Pine Street, casting golden light across the polished floors where dozens of young people were learning trades that would change their lives forever. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching a 17-year-old named Marcus learn to use a circular saw under the patient guidance of one of the volunteer instructors, and felt his father's presence as strongly as if Robert Plainview were standing right beside him. The Robert Plainview Foundation for Second Chances read the bronze plaque by the entrance, and beneath it, in his father's own words, "Every person deserves the tools to build their own future." "You're smiling again," Emma said, appearing at his side with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of radiant glow that came from doing work that mattered. "That's becoming a habit." Daniel accepted the coffee and pulled her close, still marveling at how natural it felt to be happy. "I was just thinking about how proud Dad would be. We've got 43 kids in the program now, and 12 of them have already landed full-time jobs." Emma leaned into him, her engagement ring catching the morning light. They'd gotten engaged 3 months ago, not with fanfare or expensive restaurants, but quietly, in his father's house. Their house now, over breakfast and the Sunday crossword puzzle. It had been perfect in its simplicity, just like everything else about their relationship. "Speaking of your father," Emma said, "I have something to show you." She led him to the small office they'd set up in the back of the center, where a stack of letters waited on the desk. "These came in yesterday's mail. Scholarship applications for next year." Daniel picked up the first letter and began reading. It was from a single mother in Tacoma who wanted to become a nurse but couldn't afford school. The second was from a veteran who wanted to learn welding. The third was from a teenager who'd aged out of foster care and dreamed of becoming an electrician. 237 applications, Emma said softly. For 50 scholarships. "Daniel, we're changing lives." He set down the letters and looked around the office at the photos on the walls showing scholarship recipients at their graduations, at the thank you notes from families whose medical bills had been quietly paid, at the newspaper clipping about the community garden they'd funded in his father's old neighborhood. "We need to expand," Daniel said suddenly. "The scholarship program, the trade school, all of it. Dad left me enough money to help thousands of people, not just dozens." Emma smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been working on a proposal to open 3 more centers. One in Tacoma, one in Spokane, and one in Portland. We could help kids across the entire Pacific Northwest." Daniel kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by gratitude for this woman who understood not just his dreams, but his responsibilities. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Only every day," Emma laughed. "But I don't mind hearing it again." Their moment was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Sarah Chun stood in the doorway, grinning broadly and holding a manila envelope. "I have news," Sarah announced. Victoria's sentencing hearing was this morning. Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Even a year later, hearing Victoria's name still brought back echoes of the pain she'd caused. How long? 3 years in federal prison for fraud and perjury. She'll also have to pay full restitution. Not that she has anything left to pay with. Turns out her boyfriend Marcus Aurelius was running a Ponzi scheme. She lost everything when his house of cards collapsed. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the news. A year ago, he might have felt satisfaction at Victoria's downfall. Now, he mostly felt sad for the woman she could have been if she'd chosen differently. "I hope she finds some peace in prison," he said finally. "I hope she figures out how to be happy without trying to take happiness away from other people." Sarah looked at him with something like wonder. "You know, Daniel, I've been practicing law for 15 years, and I've never seen someone come through a battle like that with so much grace. Your father would be incredibly proud of the man you've become." After Sarah left, Daniel and Emma walked through the community center, checking on the various programs. In one room, A group of women were learning computer skills that would help them re-enter the workforce. In another, teenagers were building furniture that would be donated to families in need. Every room buzzed with the energy of people discovering their own potential. "Mr. Plainview," a young voice called out, and Daniel turned to see Maria Santos, the nursing student who'd texted him after the trial. She was volunteering at the center on her days off from the hospital, teaching basic first aid to the trade school students. "Maria, how are you? How's work at the hospital?" "Amazing," she said, her face lighting up. "I'm working in the pediatric ICU now, and every day I get to help kids who remind me of myself when I was little. Mr. Plainview, I need you to know, your father didn't just pay for my education. He saved my life, and now I get to save other lives because of him." As Maria hurried back to her class, Daniel felt tears threatening. This was his father's true legacy, not the money or the properties, but the ripple effect of kindness that would continue long after both of them were gone. That evening, Daniel and Emma sat on the porch of the house where he'd grown up, watching the sunset paint the Seattle sky in shades of gold and pink. The house had been renovated, but kept its essential character. It was still modest, still welcoming, still the kind of place where a working man could feel at home. "I've been thinking," Emma said, curled up against his side, "about the wedding. They've been planning a small ceremony for the fall. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends in a backyard where Daniel had played as a child. What about it? I want to include something about your father in the ceremony. Maybe we could plant a tree in his memory, or read something from one of his letters." Daniel smiled, thinking about the man who'd loved him quietly but completely, who'd protected him even from beyond the grave. "I'd like that. Dad never got to see me truly happy, but somehow I think he knew this day would come." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "Daniel, can I tell you something? The day I met you, when you first came in my office, I could see how much pain you were carrying. You looked like a man who'd forgotten how to hope. And now you look like a man who knows exactly who he is and what he's worth. You look like your father's son." Daniel pulled her closer, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a broken man sitting in a courthouse, watching his wife mock him as she destroyed their marriage. Now he was engaged to a woman who loved him completely, running a foundation that was changing lives, and finally understanding the depth of his father's love. His phone buzzed with a text, and he glanced at it expecting another scholarship application or foundation business. Instead, it was from an unknown number. "Mr. Plainview, you don't know me, but my name is Robert Jr. I'm named after your father, who paid for my mom's cancer treatment when I was 10 years old. I just graduated from college with a degree in social work, and I want to dedicate my life to helping people the way your father helped my family. Thank you for continuing his legacy. The world is better because of men like you and your father." Daniel showed the text to Emma, who smiled through tears. "See, your father's love just keeps growing, touching lives in ways you'll never even know about." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Daniel thought about the safety deposit box that had saved his life, about the father who'd loved him enough to protect him from beyond the grave, about the woman beside him who'd helped him remember how to dream. "Emma," he said softly, "will you marry me?" She laughed, holding up her left hand where his grandmother's ring sparkled in the porch light. "Daniel Plainview, I already said yes 3 months ago." "I know," he said, grinning. "I just like hearing you say it." "Yes," she said, kissing him softly. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life Robert Plainview had died to give his son, Daniel felt a peace so profound it seemed to emanate from his very bones. He'd found love, purpose, and the freedom to choose happiness over obligation. Most importantly, he learned that his father's greatest gift hadn't been the money or the properties or even the protection for Victoria's schemes. It has been the lesson that love, real love, doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies, touching lives in ways that echo through generations. The Robert Plainview Foundation would continue to grow, helping thousands of people build better lives. Daniel and Emma would marry in the fall, surrounded by the community they'd helped create. And somewhere, in whatever realm exists beyond this one, a construction worker who'd learned to love through actions rather than words was finally at peace, knowing his son had found the happiness he'd always deserved. The story that began with mockery and humiliation had ended with love and redemption. And in the quiet of that perfect evening, Daniel could almost hear his father's voice one last time. "Well done, son. Well done." Asterisk, and there we have it. The perfect ending to an incredible journey. Daniel found love, purpose, and the strength to honor his father's legacy. Victoria got her comeuppance. And most importantly, Daniel learned that he was worthy of love all along. Thank you so much for taking this emotional journey with me. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which part was your favorite. Stories like this remind us that love always wins in the end, and that sometimes the people who seem to have the least are actually the richest of all. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of love, you are stronger than you know, and your story isn't over yet. Keep believing in happy endings, because they're out there waiting for you too.